Hello, welcome to another Redesigning School Counseling Tips video. The focus of this video is the School Counselor Time Use Log. My name is Sue Reynolds and I'm president of the American Student Achievement Institute. So in this video we'll cover three things. We'll talk about the rationale for using a time use log, the process of using a time use log, and then we'll look over some templates that are available in the RSC online system. So we'll begin with rationale. So down the road in future months, you will be working with your council to define program goals. And your program goals will be focused on student choices that students tend to make when they're successful at school. So there may be choices like enrolling in a rigorous curriculum, turning in their homework, asking questions when they're confused, taking a career interest inventory, visiting a college campus, creating a written career and education plan, or being assertive rather than aggressive or passive. So in most schools, there are 50 to 70 different choices that successful students tend to make during the years that they're enrolled in your building. So down the road, we'll be working with your council to identify those choices for students in your school, and those will become your program goals. And there will be a lot of them, 50 to 70. Then we'll meet with your council and we'll talk about how we would love to work on all of those goals, and we'll talk about the reality of the resources that you have available to help you help kids reach those goals. So we'll talk about the amount of funding you have available, the materials, your school network, your community network, professional development activities that you are able to participate in as a counselor, space available, technology, materials, and time. And when we get to time, we want to talk about ideally how we would like counselors to be able to spend their time so that they could reach and help as many students as possible reach those goals. And then we want to look at the reality of how counselors spend their time. So again, down the road, we'll have a meeting with your council where we talk about all those goals, and then we'll say, okay, in order to help kids meet those goals, make those choices, how do we want our counselors to spend their time? And your council may come up with something like this. They'd say in an ideal school counseling program, counselors would be spending about 40% of their time on guidance, 30 on counseling, 10 on advocacy, 5 on management, and 5% on non-program. And again, just like teachers spend part of their school day doing non-program activities, we think it's realistic for counselors to be expected to do some non-program activities. Okay, so that may be the desired time percentages, and we'll work with the council to come to consensus on what they feel the desired time use is. And then we'll say to the council, boy, that's great. We'd love to help students make all those choices that you identified, and we understand that and we agree with this is a wonderful way for us to use our time, but here's the reality. In reality, we are only spending 5% of our time doing guidance activities, 3% of our time doing counseling activities, 0% of our time advocating for kids, 2% managing our program, and 90% of our time doing non-program activities. And these, may look, like drastic percentages, but these are actually my school counseling percentages when I first started as a school counselor in a program that was really not using counselors as counselors. So when you present this data, in a lot of cases, your council will be kind of, dumbfounded that the school counselors are not spending their time doing guidance and counseling. And the first question they're likely to ask is, well, where did that data come from? And then you'll be able to say, well, we did a time task log, and, so this is based on data that we've collected over this period of time. Their next question is likely to be, well, what are those non-program activities? And before you have this discussion with your council, we'll prep you so that you're able to answer that question. You'll have a handout ready to distribute to show all of the non-program activities that you do if that question comes up and if your non-program percentage is high. So then what tends to happen then is that the council will become very creative in brainstorming ways to get those non-program activities away from the counselors so that the counselors can work with guidance and counseling. In my own school, our athletic director stepped up and said, you know, I could administer the state tests. One of our English teachers said I'd be willing to take over managing graduation. Yeah, so, you know, people get really creative. And in many schools, we've had folks say, you know, we really need another school counselor. So, you know, let's look at how do we position ourselves so that we can hire another counselor. Another part of the discussion may be that we were going to reduce our counseling number and our number of counselors, and you know, this may be the data that you need to help folks understand that you should not reduce the number of counselors in your building. So anyway, this is a really, really important discussion, and it's one of the reasons why we want to create that time use log. So here's the process. In that time use log, the templates that we'll provide look like this. There will be a Word doc template, and then there will also be, as an option, an Excel spreadsheet template, and down the road, I'll talk about in a minute, we'll also have an online template. So we're just looking at the paper template, the Word doc right now, and I just wanted to kind of make you familiar with this template. So the first thing is that you would enter, each counselor would enter their counselor's name, and the week beginning on whatever that Monday's date is. So you'd put that in. And then I wanted to show you that there are codes for the types of activities. So guidance, counseling, advocacy, management, and non-program. We're going to list our activities, and then we're going to code them. Definitions of those words are on this screen. You can pause the screen if you really want to, pause the video if you really want to take some time to look at this. But basically, guidance activities are activities that help all students master guidance standards. And the way I like to think about guidance activities is that when we're doing guidance as counselors, we're in teaching mode. We're teaching students about career content or academic opportunities, financial aid. We're teaching kids social personal skills. So we're in teaching mode. So examples of those kinds of activities might be classroom guidance activities, might be individual guidance activities where you're teaching you've brought a student in to teach that student what an SAT is. And how to sign up for one. You know, we're in teaching mode. So it could be an individual activity as well. Career interest inventories, financial aid nights. We're in teaching mode when we're doing those things. In terms of counseling, those are activities that help students address a personal or social issue that is interfering with learning. So individual counseling, group counseling, crisis counseling, consultation are all counseling activities. Advocacy activities are activities in which counselors advocate for the rights or needs of an individual student or a group of students. So if you're participating in a case conference as a student advocate, not as the manager of the case conference, but as the student's advocate, you would be, you know, doing an advocacy activity. If you were advocating for a change in school policy or program or procedure, that would be an advocacy activity. So, so that's advocacy. And then management are activities that counselors do behind the scenes to make their school counseling program run efficiently. So program development, activity preparation, writing passes in the morning or in the evening before you go home. Program evaluation, professional development, networking. What you're doing right now is management. You're doing professional development. And then non-program are activities that do not help students master the guidance indicators. They do not help students address a personal social issue that's interfering with learning. So when counselors are serving as a registrar or an administrator, when they're master scheduling or scheduling teacher time, or they're substitute teaching or doing hall duty, those are non-program activities. Again, those aren't bad activities. Somebody has to do them, but it's just when counselors do them, they're not counseling activities. Just as when teachers do them, they're not teaching activities. They're non-program activities. So, okay. So those are the definitions. And then how you would complete the log is that every 20 minutes you would write down what you did. So this is actually one of my logs from January when I was in a high school. So you can see that on Monday morning I started out with a management activity. I was developing a form that I needed for some of my guidance activities, so that was management. And then you can see that after school started, so that dark line there is the start of my contract hours. So when school started, you can see that I met with students with individual guidance activities for 20-minute appointments. All these student names are fictitious, of course. Um, Given that this was a January time task log, I was probably meeting with students about schedule changes, and in doing so was talking with students about about how that schedule change would impact their career plans or their post-secondary academic plans. So it was a guidance activity. I wasn't scheduling teacher time, which would be a non-program activity, but I was advising the students and guiding the students and teaching the students as I did these activities. So that made them guidance activities. Okay. You can see on Tuesday, Julie Sang must have requested an appointment, and I scheduled a 20-minute appointment with her. When she came in, it became obvious that it was a counseling appointment. She had a personal social concern that she wanted to talk to me about. And it was a major concern. However, I had Zach coming in 20 minutes to talk with me. So Julie was not in crisis mode. She had a counseling activity or a counseling need that she wanted to talk with me about. So you can see what I did. I scheduled a follow-up appointment with Julie the next day. We brought her back in for an hour appointment to really talk about whatever the social personal issue was. And then you can see that this was probably something that was pretty major because I scheduled a follow-up appointment on Thursday to talk again with Julie for 40 minutes, and then probably just a check-in appointment on Friday to see how things were going, a little 20-minute appointment. Then a couple other things I wanted to point out on this log is that in our building we had an advisor-advisee program. So when I was meeting with my group of 12 advisees, then I was back in teaching mode, so that was a guidance activity, and so I logged that in as guidance. On Friday, I had some parents that wanted to come talk with me about a concern that they had about their child, and I started doing consultations, so I was helping Mr. and Mrs. Daly think about how to work with the third party, their student, their child. And so I was in consultation mode, which is a counseling skill, so that was a counseling activity. Later in the day, I was wearing my registrar hat that I still had and was printing honor rolls, so that was a non-program activity. So that's kind of examples of different kinds of activities and how you would log them in. Okay, so at the bottom of the time use log, there are boxes where you would total up the time for the week. So you can see that when I totaled up my guidance and counseling, advocacy, management, non-program boxes and then calculated the percentages, I ended up with 50% of my time in guidance, 47 in counseling, 4 in advocacy, 25 in management, 3 in non-program. And then my goals are down at the bottom. Now right now you don't have goals that your council has defined, but you can write in your personal goals there and kind of, you know, compare how are you doing this week compared to your goals. And it may be, you know, for some weeks, like in January, I tended to always be high in guidance because I was working with kids on schedule changes and looking at impact with their, you know, their long-term goals with the schedule changes. So I had a lot of guidance in January. In October, I tended to schedule a lot of my group counseling activities in October, early November, because there were less guidance activities that I needed to do in those months. So in October, I might have, you know, a heavy percentage in counseling. So, okay. And then I would suggest that you total up your boxes week to week, because at the in the longer time periods, if you're holding your boxes for a year to look at your data over a year or a semester, it will help if you can look at totaled boxes for each week and add those together rather than adding up thousands of boxes all at once. So, okay. Then the bottom right box is for you to list your total outside of contract boxes. So I've made a heavy line on the paper where my contract time ended. So my contract ended at 3:20. So everything that came after that I was doing on my time. And for me personally, this was okay for me. I knew that teachers, spent time outside of contract grading papers, and for me it was just okay, with me personally, for me to have some outside of contract time. But I wanted to kind of keep track of that time to make sure that it wasn't getting over intrusive into my family time. And also just, to be able to, just to know, that I'm spending X amount of time per week out of my time that I'm donating to make my program run well. Now, that was okay with me, but that's not okay with every counselor, and I think that this is a personal choice. If there's a counselor who has, young children at home, or has a job after school, a second job in order to pay all the bills or whatever, it may not be okay to have extra time, a lot of time outside of contract hours. And if that's the case, we want to be able to talk about that later with your counsel. So part of that counsel discussion is going to be to acknowledge, I tend to spend, I don't know, 10 hours a week outside of contract time doing my management activities so that I can be face-to-face with kids and parents during the school day. Or say I'm spending 10 hours, but I really need to get a second job, or I've got children at home and I have daycare issues and I really need to get that percentage of time outside of the school day down. We just want to be able to toss out that conversation and do it in a way that's data-based. So it's not just a kind of a wishy-washy conversation, but there maybe even is goals there that we're working to get from 10% of our time outside of contract to 10 hours outside of contract to 2 hours outside of contract, or whatever that is for you personally. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. I'm just tossing this out so that you can collect data to look at this and think about it and possibly have a discussion with your counsel about it. Also, wanted to point out that most of the outside of contract time is going to be for management. You can see that, here's, things I was doing to get ready for a program. But then I did have an evening program for parents. So this was a guidance activity. That should just say G. That's a guidance activity. Or sometimes because teachers are with students all day, sometimes you may need to do a teacher meeting for advocacy outside of contract time. So yeah, so that's just kind of how outside of contract time works. One other thing is that notice that the very last thing that I did each day, I'll talk about this in a minute, is that I wrote passes for the next day. That's always the last thing that I did in my school day. Okay, so now let's talk about taking control of your time. Another use of the time use log, which I think is just amazing, is that it allows you to gain control over your time. The expectation in a lot of schools, and maybe in your school too, is that school counselors should be immediately available to anyone for any reason at a moment's notice. That, you should always be there no matter what for anyone at any time with no warning. It just someone comes in and says, do you have a minute? And you're able to immediately support them. So you can use the time use log to gain control over your time. So here's what we started doing, and to be honest, I went down kicking and screaming on time use logs. My principal made me do them, and I hated them in the beginning. I learned to love them because they allowed me to gain control over my time. I mentioned early that I was spending 90% of my time doing things that had nothing to do with guidance or counseling, those non-program activities. When I left my school to go to the State Department to serve as the school counseling consultant, we had gotten that down to 10% of our time on non-program, 90% to 10%. And this is the main way that we did that. We completed our logs. We started completing our logs a day ahead of time. And we did them in pencil because we knew that there were legitimate crises that students would have where we would have to drop everything. But we really started thinking about what is a crisis? Is it that a student, I don't know, bump their toe and it's a crisis, or is something really major happen? So we completed our logs a day ahead of time in pencil so that if a crisis did show up, we could quickly, adjust things. And we started thinking about this just like, a doctor attorney. I mean, a doctor and an attorney schedules their appointments way ahead of time. If a doctor, though, has a crisis come in, then everybody has to wait or they reschedule or whatever. So we're just suggesting that you schedule your time ahead of time using these logs, do it in pencil, understand that a crisis may come in, but you've got your day, planned. Then the other tip that we have is to put passes in the teachers' mailboxes, student passes, in the mailboxes before you go home each evening. Then when someone comes in and says, do you have a minute? A teacher walks in and says, do you have a sec? Or your principal comes in and says, do you have a minute? Or could you cover this substitute teaching? Or, you can, say, well, I'd love to do that, but I already have X scheduled. I already have passes and mailboxes for kids to come in. I already have this appointment with these parents, scheduled. If you've scheduled your time ahead of time, that allows you to tell people, I cannot be immediately available for you because I have this already scheduled. I used to love that. If my principal would say, would you do this substitute teaching? I'd say, I'd love to. I'll just tell those 3 students that I already have passes out for to go back to class. And then my principal would always say, oh, no, if you're busy, go ahead and see those students. I'll find someone else. So this is a really good way to take control of your time. It's another reason why we really like time task logs. Okay. So I mentioned earlier, we do have for your available to you an electronic time use log that automatically adds up all the boxes and calculates all the percentages. So a lot of counselors like to use that because then you don't have to do the math. And then coming soon is an online counselor time use log. We hope to have this available in the early winter of 2017. And so late January, early February. And the nice thing about the online time use log is that it will not only auto tally the individual counselor time use, but it will aggregate all of the data for the entire department. A lot of schools differentiate their counselor tasks. So in my building did that as well. We had one counselor that did nothing but social emotional counseling. So on her log, everything had counseling C, was logged as a counseling C activity. Other counselors, had more responsibilities in the guidance realm. One of our counselors was responsible for all the career guidance or career teaching activities. I was responsible for all the academic guidance activities. And then, so for any one of us, it looked kind of, skewed the data. But when we added all of our time use logs together, we had a very nice balanced program for kids. So, okay. So that's coming, and I'm really excited about that. I can't wait. We'll send you an email when that's available and let you know that that is live. In the meantime, we'll use the paper log or the Excel spreadsheet. So the rubric, this is a Gold Star in ASCA requirement for the Gold Star and RAMP awards. We need to have evidence that there's planning and a calendar for each counselor's first semester and each counselor's second semester. Now, depending on when you are beginning RSC, this may be a challenge. If you are beginning RSC at the beginning of January and your first semester is about to end, that would mean that you need to make sure that you've done that a one-week calendar or one-week time use log like immediately before your semester ends. And then the second one for each counselor can come into the second semester. If you're starting this in January and your program ended in December, please contact us and we'll give you some thoughts about how to handle that. But I think most schools start their second semester in January, so we should be okay with that. Then just to kind of drive this home, if you have let's say you have 3 counselors in your building, that means that you would need to provide 6 time use logs, because you'll have a first semester log and a second semester log for each of your 3 counselors, and 2 times 3 is 6. So, okay, hopefully that made that clear, and if not, call us and we'll go over that with you. Okay, so let's look at the time use system online. So when you get the resources, you would go to our web address, www.asainstitute.org/RSC. That will take you to this page, and then you want to log in as a school. So you'll need to get the username and password from a steering team member, or if you're a steering team member, you'll have that. Or the other thing that could happen is your steering team could just provide you with a paper copy or the Excel spreadsheet version of the time use log if you're not on the steering team. So I'm going to log in. So if you're a steering team member, you'll be logging in. I'm going to go to the process page, and then I'm going to scroll down to the data section, and I'm looking for step 6, begin the time use log. I'm going to click this, and this gives me then again more definitions of the definition of the different types of time use. And then here's where I can download the Word document version, or I can download the time use log Excel spreadsheet version. Don't worry yet about uploading these logs, because we need to get all 6 logs before you do that. You'll put all 6 logs into one PDF and then upload that one PDF with all 6 logs to us. But we'll do that later after we get started with the second semester. Okay, and then when we have the online version, there will be additional options here so that you can do the online version as well. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to go back and just capture that last slide, and that is, if you have any questions about this, please feel free to contact us. One question that we often get is, we're not quite sure if we should log this as guidance or counseling or advocacy. Please feel free to contact with us and ask us for our input on how to log an activity. However, I wouldn't sweat it too much. What's more important is that everybody in your department has the same definitions, that if you're going to a case conference and one person's logging it as this, then everybody in your department is also logging it as that. So there needs to be agreement between everybody in your department. And then it needs just to be consistent, that, if one time case conference comes up and you log it as non-program, then the next time it comes up, you also log it as non-program if you're administering the case conference. And that's one that could go either way, because it could be you're there as the student advocacy and advocate, and then it would be advocacy. So there really needs to be some discussion within your departments to make sure that on these things that are kind of in the middle, everybody's kind of doing it the same way. And then everybody needs to understand that, so that you can communicate that with your principal or your council or your school board or whatever. So the most important thing is that everybody understands in-house what those terms mean, the way you've defined them, and that everybody's doing it the same way and very consistently. Okay, that's the biggest question we get. But if you have other questions, please feel free to call us or email us. On the screen is our general email address and our general phone number. If you have the contact information from the strategic planning specialist that's been assigned to your school, you can contact that person directly as well. So, okay, I think that's it. I wish everybody happy logging, and appreciate your participation in this video.